Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really plunging into a fascinating chapter of history. It's about a community returning from exile, but then facing, well, an even bigger challenge than the captivity itself. We're talking about the Jewish people coming back from Babylon and hitting this huge cultural wave head-on, Hellenism. And this wasn't just, politics or armies. It was this deep cultural force, potentially strong enough to just dissolve Jewish identity, Judaism itself. So the big question for us today is, how on earth did they protect their faith, their culture, when facing something like that? An existential crisis, really.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, what this deep dive shows, is the critical role of figures who are often, let's say, misunderstood. We get a chance to correct some historical interpretations here, especially ones that got kind of distorted later on, often through religious lenses. The sources we have actually describe Hellenism as a, quote, bigger mountain than just military or political pressure. I mean, think about it, even massive ancient civilizations like Mesopotamia, Egypt, they were seriously changed by this cultural flow. It wasn't simple domination. It was much more like a cultural melting pot pulling everything into it.
Okay, let's unpack that. Hellenism. What was it, really? And how did it spread so powerfully?
Well, at the heart of it, you really have to look at Alexander the Great.
The conqueror.
Right, but he wasn't just a conqueror. He was actually a student of Aristotle. And he had this goal beyond just winning battles. He aimed to essentially civilize the world. His method, spreading Greek culture, which was, a totally different playbook compared to earlier rulers who mostly relied on force. Alexander and the rulers after him, they aimed for integration using cultural power.
How did they do that? What were the actual methods?
Oh, they were incredibly effective and worked on multiple levels. So you had widespread building projects, stadiums, theaters everywhere.
Little visible stuff.
Exactly. And they actively promoted popular events, wrestling matches, plays, things that drew crowds. But it wasn't only popular culture. They also pushed elite education, philosophy, rhetoric, the high culture stuff. And this mix, hitting both the popular and the elite levels, let Hellenism just seep into every part of society, and fast.
That blend does sound incredibly potent. So what was it specifically about this Greek lifestyle that felt like such a threat to Jewish identity? Where was the real clash?
A big one was the Greek emphasis on physical training.
The gymnasium culture.
Precisely. Especially the athletic contests, often performed in the nude. This was profoundly alien to traditional Jewish values. Jewish tradition really emphasized modesty and perhaps more intellectual or spiritual pursuits over glorifying the physical body in that way. So it wasn't just different, it felt like a direct challenge to their core beliefs.
Right, a fundamental conflict. Now, you mentioned misunderstood figures earlier. Our sources point to the scribes and Pharisees, people often painted as just rigid legalists, obsessed with tiny rules. But the claim is they were actually leading the defense against Hellenism. How does that work? That seems counterintuitive.
It really does challenge the common picture, doesn't it? But yes, contrary to those negative stereotypes, the sources suggest they were right at the forefront. They weren't just sitting back. They were devising really creative strategies to push back against this cultural tide. Active innovators, not just rule keepers.
Okay, so in this huge cultural battle, what was their first move? What was the first line of defense? You mentioned rules. How did something like Sabbath regulations become a tool against this external force?
That was strategy number one, essentially. Strengthening and, crucially, reinterpreting the Sabbath rules. See, a lot of the Greek games, the performances, they tended to happen on the Sabbath.
Convenient timing for them, maybe.
Or inconvenient for the Jews trying to resist. So Jewish leaders responded. They tightened rules like how far you could travel on the Sabbath. And they really emphasized synagogue-centered activities, worship, study, community focus.
So it functioned almost like a physical barrier.
Exactly. It was like weaponizing the calendar. The Sabbath became this invisible wall, a weekly, deliberate pulling back that physically and culturally separated the community from those Hellenistic events happening right outside their doors. Survival strategy disguised as religious observance.
Wow. That really shows how intertwined religious practice and cultural survival became. Okay, what else? What other methods did they come up with? The pressure must have been immense.
Well, another major development was the rise of what we call apocalyptic literature.
Like the Book of Daniel.
Precisely. Daniel's a key example. Also, texts like the Book of Enoch, which is apocryphal, meaning not in everyone's Bible, but hugely influential back then. And you even see echoes of this style later in the New Testament's Book of Revelation. This whole genre, it seems, really bloomed out of periods of intense persecution and this kind of cultural threat.
And what was this literature actually like? What did it do?
It used incredibly vivid, often bizarre imagery. Think fantastical beasts, cosmic battles. But these weren't just random fantasies. Each symbol, each beast was often a thinly veiled representation of a real-world power.
Like the Hellenistic empires.
Exactly. It portrayed them as forces of evil, essentially. And then it depicted, often quite graphically, God's ultimate triumph and judgment over these forces.
So was it a kind of secret code then to keep spirits up?
Pretty much, yeah. It functioned as an encrypted message. It used symbols and visions that insiders would understand. It was designed to instill hope, a sense of meaning, and definitely a spirit of resistance among the community. But crucially, it would likely seem like nonsense, or at least be incomprehensible to their oppressors, to outsiders. So it acted as this powerful spiritual weapon. It helped hold the community together and preserve that distinct identity under pressure.
That makes sense. A hidden transcript of resistance.
You could put it that way. And underpinning all of these strategies, the Sabbath rules, the apocalyptic visions, was a really fundamental belief, the belief in retribution. Or you could call it cause and effect, divine justice, something like that.
How did that work in practice?
It was incredibly powerful. The core conviction was that if you broke God's law, there would be consequences. Divine punishment, essentially. This wasn't just an abstract idea. It functioned as a powerful social norm for the whole community.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine someone, maybe tempted, sneaks off to attend a Greek game on the Sabbath. And let's say, while they're there, they trip and break their leg.
Okay.
Within the community, that wouldn't just be seen as bad luck. It would likely be interpreted as divine punishment for breaking the Sabbath. You can see how that creates a really effective internal mechanism for enforcing adherence to the rules. It's a kind of self-policing, driven by this deep belief. It made the internal rules often feel more real and immediate than any external temptation. It built resilience from the inside out.
That is truly eye-opening. Okay, so let's try to pull this together. We've seen the Jewish people facing this just massive cultural challenge from Hellenism. They didn't just crumble, they got creative.
Yeah.
They defended their identity using these unique strategies, strengthening Sabbath rules, developing this whole genre of apocalyptic literature. And what really stands out, as you said earlier, is this revised view of the scribes and Pharisees. Not just legalists, but key strategists in this cultural defense. It really suggests their historical image might be missing some vital context, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It forces us to look past the later caricatures and see their actions within this specific high-stakes historical moment. And, stepping back, this whole episode offers a broader lesson, I think. It's a powerful example of how a community, when facing intense external cultural pressure, can do more than just survive. They can actually forge an even stronger, more defined identity through that process of resistance and adaptation.
That's a really important point. It's not just about preservation, but transformation too.
Exactly. And maybe a final thought for you listening.
Yeah.
This isn't just some dusty story about ancient people. There's a real resonance here with challenges we still face today, right? Questions about cultural conflict, identity preservation in a globalized world. It kind of encourages you to think about how lessons from the past, this kind of historical wisdom, might inform how we understand ourselves and our own societies now.
Absolutely. A fascinating look at how cultural resilience can be actively built. The contemporary relevance, as you say, is undeniable. A truly insightful deep dive.